This is week 2, and the focus is called The Gate. And the teaching is that each soul must be converted the same way. It must come through the gate of faith. And the discipline is to know the development of a soul to salvation by grace. There's 2 scriptures we're going to be considering. The first is Matthew 7:13 through 14. This is Jesus preaching in the Sermon on the Mount. Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through that. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. So just to build the image here, the gate of salvation is described as narrow, that it leads to a narrow road, and that few find it. Jesus says earlier in the same sermon, that the gate will open to all who knock, and all who enter the gate legitimately will progress down the pilgrim's path. If you come through the gate, you will make it as far as possible before you die. Then Jesus will carry you the full distance through the pearly gates. Now the truth is, when it comes to the gate and the path behind the gate, many don't know. Many don't care, and several people post up just outside the gate. Some believe that they're just inside the gate, but they haven't progressed. They are most likely just outside the gate, and if not careful, they will be part of what the Bible calls the great falling away, that there will be many times in history when people who looked like they were saved, they looked like they were converted, fall away from the faith. And that'll be all those people who lived outside the gate and just thought they were inside the gate when they were really outside. The first question I've got is, what is the difference between sitting outside the gate versus entering through the gate and progressing down the path? I want to describe to you something that we call the danger zone, that is a huge area of the world. And it's all the people, number one, who are outside the gate, don't know about the gate, don't care about the gate, and those who never have come through the gate, but they just sing songs about the gate and go to church on Sunday. That includes that, but the danger zone also includes a portion of just inside the gate. And I'm going to explain why it includes that as well. That danger zone is the place where souls require a lot of grace and a lot of love in order for them to know Christ, for them to progress. And so the real goal is to make it in through the gate, down the path, outside of the danger zone. The goal is to know, to knock, to enter, and to progress, and ultimately to be so far down the path where your progress, Jesus will limit you on whether or not you'll turn around and help the people who are behind you. So I just want you to see that danger zone, to see that whole picture, because we're going to be talking about that throughout this lesson. Again, you have a gate, you have a road that leads to the pearly gates, and there's a zone over that area that includes the far away and people who've just come to Christ until they're proven, until they're assured of their salvation. Anyone in that danger zone needs a lot of love, a lot of care and time. We're going to turn now to Matthew chapter 13. And look at verses 1 through 9. And before I say this, I want to mention that Jesus gives this parable and then explains it because Jesus is concerned about false conversions. A farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among the thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still others seed fell on the ground, on the good soil, where it produced a crop 160 or 30 times what was sown. He who has ears, let him hear. And Jesus explains this parable beginning in verse 18. Listen to what the parable of the sower means. When anyone hears the message about the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in his heart. This is the seed sown along the path. And so Jesus says, this describes the person who has a hard heart and they will not conceive of or listen. So this is the person who doesn't want to hear about Jesus, or the person who, when talked to or engaged with about Jesus, about the truth, about the gospel, they just aren't in a position to want it, to care, to know. And it's really a sad state, but much of the world is there. In fact, I think you could argue everybody was there at some point. But by grace, we've been softened. He goes on and talks about the shallow soil. The one who received the seed that fell on rocky places is the man who hears the word and at once receives it with joy. But since he has no root, he lasts only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, he quickly falls away. So the shallow soil is what we call a fair weather Christian. And that would be the person who lives near the gate but doesn't actually come through the gate. They live near the gate for various reasons. It's popular to be a Christian. They were peer pressured to be near the gate. And as long as there's enough social pressure for them to talk about Jesus or be near Jesus, then they'll be a Christian. But as soon as being a Christian is hard or unpopular, they're going to fall away. And Jesus wants people to know that. He doesn't say that may happen. And throughout the scriptures, he says that will happen. So it's important that we make sure that it's not us and that's not anyone we love, that we love them enough to be concerned about leading and helping people get farther, not just to the gate and through the gate, but as far down the path as possible. The next person is the thorny soil, and this is in verse 22. The one who received the seed that fell among the thorns is the man who hears the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke it out, making it unfruitful. And so the thorny soil is a real precarious spot because that is a person who technically believes. It's a person who's not afraid of persecution or difficulty of being a Christian. But this is the person who's trying to progress, but the gravitational pull of the world and all the concerns of the world is just too great. And in terms of science, we know that the only thing that can outdo a force, like the gravitational pull of the world, is another force that is greater and in the opposite direction. This force is God's grace, and it comes many times in the form of a person who will come alongside you and disciple you. And so when we're looking at that danger zone, as I mentioned before, the hard heart is part of that. The shallow soil, the person that lives outside the gate but is tricking themselves into thinking they're saved, is part of the danger zone. But it's also the person who's trying to progress through the gate and down the path until that person has broken free from the gravitational pull of the world by the grace of God. That person needs a lot of love and a lot of attention. Now, the last one Jesus mentions in verse 23 is, but the one who's received the good seed that fell on good soil is the man who hears the word and understands it. He produces a crop yielding 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. And so this final description is a person by grace who has come through the gate, progressed out of the danger zone, and is now concerned not about themselves, but about the farmer receiving the yield of his crop out of us and out of the world. This is the saved. This is what the gospel is designed to produce in a person. Last week we talked about be fruitful and multiply, but this is about on an individual basis. Every single person is designed to come through the same gate, to progress down the path, and to help others progress down the path too. So my second question here is, where are you in this picture? Are you in the danger zone? If so, where? Question 3 is, considering other people, how does Jesus' teaching about the gate and the path and the different types of soil, how does that help us adjust to the mission to help win souls to the faith? The takeaway here is we are redeemed in grace that produces in us a willingness to progress. Matthew 7:20, Jesus says, "You will know a tree by its fruit." So let us remember that the gospel is not designed to just justify a person or forgive their sins. It's also designed, the same gospel is designed to produce a life of fruitfulness, of entering the gate and progressing as far as possible. So just let this image be in your heart so that we can respect the arrangement of heaven, that every single soul must come to salvation the exact same way. And even if you don't make it far down the path, if you die at a young age after you've been converted, you're still in heaven. But the goal is, if you're a true Christian, is that you would progress as far as possible until you run out of time. There's no such thing as somebody who just wants to come through the gate and then sit right there in front, just inside the gate, and live their life for the world and not for Christ. Jesus would call that a unicorn. That position doesn't exist. And so to clear anything up about your own salvation, I think it's important for each of us to make the most of our time, to progress and to help others do the same, and to be a tree which is known by its fruit.